while I welcome to the stage Michael Enright and Bill Buxton.
Good morning. When I got the phone call from my boss, Christopher Boyce, to come out here, I told him that he had gotten the wrong local, that it was fine to get Nora on the phone and ask her out, but me, this is terra incognita, as far as I'm concerned. Back in the 1970s, when I was at Maclean's magazine, I was asked to join an expedition led by a man named Robert Rhines into finding the Loch Ness Monster in a village called Drumnadrochit in Scotland. And I felt more comfortable looking for Nessie than I do this morning, but we'll get over that, I hope. Last year I interviewed Gore Vidal, the great essayist and novelist, and in front of an audience. And one of the questions I said, Mr. Vidal, what do you think about all the new technologies that are rushing at us with such speed? And he paused for a moment and then said, I don't. Snappy answer and crappy radio. But I want to kind of refine that question for Bill. And it seems to me that things are happening so fast that it's somehow inhibiting our ability to incorporate the changes, incorporate the speed with which these changes are coming at us. Is that my imagination, or is there some reality in that?
I think it's just a matter of perspective. So it seems fast if what you're focusing on is the technology, the gadgets, the material things. And I'd say that if you just what Till was just saying, where in terms of music, you look at new ways for music it's about the experience side of things. So the first rule I have is that I don't care about technology. I mean, of course I do. I'm a materialist geek and find things fascinating, but intellectually that's not what's happening. And anybody who thinks that a song or a phone or a pen is the product you sell, you're missing the point. That's a materialistic view. It's an objective view. What you're actually gifting or selling in your product is the experience that device or object engenders. And so we're all merchants of experience, and that's what you have to, and if you're designing a new product or service, that's what you should be designing. Design the experience, and then how do you deliver it? Now that is an interesting perspective, for me anyhow, because it changes the focus from the object to the human and and we start to view things in human terms, in cultural terms. If I do look at the evolution of technology, in fact, the longer I've been in it, the slower I notice that it's moving. And that nothing happens in less than 30 years. There is nothing that's going to become a billion-dollar industry in the next 10 years that isn't already 10 years old. Nothing. And in fact, it's probably already 15 years old. There's nothing that's going to become a new billion-dollar industry in the next 5 years that isn't at least 15 years old. Everything is there. And those of us of a certain age who've been in this business, you know that there's nothing happening today that you didn't know about 15 years ago. Now, if you knew what it meant, we'd all be gazillionaires. And that's a different thing. But at least knowing that it's there, and so when somebody comes up with a quote-unquote new idea, if it's brand new, I'll say, forget it, come back to me in 15 years. Because that's how long it takes. The mouse took 30 years from the time it was invented to the time it became ubiquitous, and everybody knew. So here's the important thing. It's sort of like knowing the difference between voltage and amperage. No single technology is moving faster than it ever has been. That means it's at least 20 years. There's good data from the National Academy of Science in the States. If you want, I can give you where to look. What passes for speed is volume. It's how many things are moving slowly as opposed to a few things moving fast. And it's all about the combinations. And so then what you really, and here's, I'll stop and say one thing. This fundamentally changes the myth that we've all been fed about invention and innovation. The Edison myth, which is nonsense. Edison didn't invent all that stuff. He was, had great lawyers, and he was a great A&R guy, and he was a very nasty man in many ways. But he collected, and he had a huge factory of people inventing the things that he invented. What it says is that invention is not a light bulb going off and making something new and becoming rich. It has far more to do with prospecting, mining, refining, and then goldsmithing to turn the gold into something worth more than its weight in gold. And it's a long, long process.
How is it important to connect the technology as it progresses over the 20-year period to some perhaps loosely defined sense of our values, our culture? Can you do it? Is it important, or are they two separate things?
I think we talked about this a bit yesterday, but my hero is a guy named Melvin Kranzberg, and he has a number of laws, and he's a historian of technology. And he says, technology is not good, it's not bad, nor is it neutral. It will not be neutral. It will have some impact, positive and negative. And my view is if anybody who's in this business, so that means if you introduce a paperclip into an office, you're changing the culture and organization of that. In the most Orwellian sense, you are designing and influencing the society and the culture. And my view is that nobody teaches us that way. The technologists aren't trained to think that way. And therefore, they're changing and designing the culture as a random act, as opposed to an intentional act. And I guess the question is, I would argue that if we approach these things in an appropriate way, first of all, you belong here. In fact, this isn't terra incognito. Rather, it's the world you live in, and we've been screwing it up. And in fact, you're the one who knows more about the cultural and social sides than most of the people who have an engineering degree. And which is why, if you don't have social scientists and designers and people with that in your technology company, you are an obsolete thing. I mean, in the computer industry, for example, in the early days, the miracle was, could you even make it work? And that was just, that was the great thing. Today, if you can't make it work and make a great product on the quality of a Kinect or an iPhone, then you shouldn't be in business. Take that for granted. That's just like if you can't play a C major scale, don't become a musician. You know, practice a little bit. The question then is, now that you can do anything, what should you do? And that brings in a whole question of ethics and values that sort of say, we are shaping our culture. We are shaping our values. And if you have no moral or value compass, how the hell can you make technological decisions, much less business decisions? And by the way, that sort of 60s, because I'm of a certain age, kind of attitude is not against sound business. I mean, I work for Microsoft, for pity's sakes. I like business.
You said you don't like the idea of products just qua products. It's important that they make the consumer, the user, feel good, feel part of the process. How do you go about doing that? You told me last night that you can't stand the phrase iPhone. Or smartphone.
Smartphone.
You don't like smartphone. Why not?
You just about got me in trouble.
Yeah, no.
I'm not allowed.
Microsoft.
No. It's just like I'm a competitive athlete, and so I love competing against really strong competitors, and the iPhone is one. So because they're not smart. Every time you call something a smartphone, you're basically saying this thing's smart. And if you think that phone is smart, for pity's sakes, your standards, pick them up. And, you know, they're smarter than they were before in certain ways, but call that thing, give it to endow it with this property of being smart? No. What we see today is so primitive to what it could be and should have been years ago, that, and the rate of progress is just frustratingly slow.
Tell me what you define as user experience design. That seems to incorporate a number of different elements. What are the core elements of that definition?
I'll give you a copy of my book after.
Please do.
I will. But
I'll need it.
But here's the deal. So the Bible, if you care about experience, the book that's the best handbook for design is a book called The Wizard of Oz. See, I have this rule that the only way to engineer the future tomorrow is to have lived in it yesterday, which sounds like a paradox, but it's not. The question is, can you live the future yesterday so you've experienced it at a visceral level, and from that experiential knowledge, which is completely different than book knowledge, can you then use that foundation to make good decisions about your product, or your service? And I'd argue that you can always find a way to have a finished product that you can work with and live with before you ever start to design it. And you sort of say, well, okay, this guy's completely out to lunch. He's talking nonsense, so let's stop listening to him. He has no credibility. But The Wizard of Oz teaches us how to do that. So if you think
How
about
does
it,
it
well,
teach you?
okay, because listen, when Dorothy walks in and the wizard is there and quaking in her toes until Toto pulls back the curtain or
Right.
pulls back the blind, depending on whether it's the movie or the book, and reveals the wizard to be a fraud, be very clear that the wizard is real in every single sense, psychologically, cognitively, perceptually, emotionally, in every sense, the wizard is real. And therefore, Dorothy's reactions are real. They're not pretend. And therefore, it was a great case of engineering the future because maybe there are wizards and we just haven't invented them yet. And there was a guy named John Gould who's a friend of mine. He was sort of somebody I learned really a lot from at IBM. And at IBM back in, I guess it was in the late 60s, speech recognition was going to be this big thing. So, you've got one on your iPhone 4 or whatever. It goes way back. And they didn't know whether they should invest a bunch of money into speech recognition. So before he even did that, and because it's a hard engineering problem, it's really easy to get sucked into that, but it's also really expensive. So what John did is he put a curtain up, put a computer terminal with a microphone in front of it on the terminal, and got a court reporter on the other side of the curtain with a set of headphones listening to the microphone. And so people came in and they dictated letters and did all this stuff, and it was 100% accurate. The punctuation was right, the paragraphing, everything. They spoke, it was on the screen. And they did all these studies of a 100% accurate automatic speech recognition dictating machine. And they found out, of course, that for people and half the people they told it was fake, and the others who didn't. The people who knew it was fake thought it was great. The people who didn't thought it was crap. But the fact was, they were able to experience this technology before they'd invested $1. You could do that. You could build a perfect system in 24 hours. And I built a thing for, you have Skype and stuff like that now. I built a system a long time ago in the 80s, in the mid-80s, where we had desktop video conferencing, broadcast quality with 600 ohm and balanced studio quality audio through every office in the building and stuff like that. We had video mail going from England to California. But the video, I built basically an answering machine out of a VHS VCR that had time code, and we recorded that, and we used it as a telecommunications carrier to go between England and Palo Alto to Xerox PARC was Federal Express. It was totally unregulated. It was the cheapest you just sent the videotapes and mounted them on the things. It was all analog. It was computer controlled, but we were able to fake it because who cares what the technology is ultimately? You see a screen, you have no idea what's behind it, and if you do, that's a failure. Listen, technology's like plumbing. The only reason and time you should know what's behind it is when there's crap all over the floor because it's broken. If you design it right, successful design is invisible, and it just happens by magic. And and the fact that it's overwhelming us is because it's so poorly designed.
So what comes first? Interface or content? Which is first? Which is sovereign? Which comes first?
In my experience, I can't design anything unless I know the color of the eyes of the person who's using it, what they want to say, and what they had for breakfast. It's really, really hard to do because you know where to make compromises. You always design is compromise. That's one of the many one-sentence definitions of design. But design is compromise, and the only way I can know the compromise is to know the content. Now, here's the catch-22. And it's a hard question to answer, that's why I'm fudging. So I built the synthesizer back in the 70s, in the late 70s, as a digital instrument. And I designed it, wire wrapped it with we had a team of us to help, and I knew it better than anyone in the world. And musicians would come from all over to my studio and use this thing, and they'd go on stage and be playing this stuff, and I knew that was impossible. You couldn't do that, didn't do that. And yet, they did it, right? And that's always the case. You can always have a reason you make your decisions and build things, but you must always build in that you'll be surprised at what comes out of it and what its impact is. And by the way, that comes, and so it's a flip-flop, back and forth, content, tool. And this just quickly, this brings me to Melvin Kranzberg's second law, which is invention is the mother of necessity. And which is, if you think about it, is actually brilliant. And so I designed it to do this. It might even do that, but it's going to do something else. And that will provoke me to do a next thing that builds on the best part, but gets rid of the bad stuff without throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Let me grasp at an analogy. You and I ride motorcycles.
Yeah?
You and I ride horses. Now, you ride English, I ride Western. Let's take the interface is the saddle or the reins or the knees, how you work it. The horse is on one side and you're on the other. Which one is the producer and which one is the user?
I was actually, a little quick aside, I just decided that ice climbing and riding horses have more in common than riding horses do with riding motorcycles. Because in ice climbing and horses, you have to have your heels way down.
That's right.
And if you're on a motorcycle, you'll melt the heels of your boots on the exhaust pipes when you have your heels down. So, so this is the interesting thing about just attributes that make things that seem really divorced similar. And
the horses don't melt. That's
the horses don't melt.
With,
yeah, no,
right.
it's just I do from fear. So, ask me the question again.
Well, the rider and the horse have to, I think, have a sense of each other. Which is which? Which is the producer? Which is the user? And how important is it, taking it away from horses for a minute, how important is it for each side of the interface to have a sense of the other?
It's completely necessary. And it's absolute. And so the answer to your question is yes. I can't answer that question without it being one of those, when did you stop beating your wife? I'd have to acknowledge the validity of the premise if I answer it. It's a partnership. It's a complete partnership. And the thing that I started writing at a high level was, first of all, you thought you'd just use your reins. Then you thought use your voice. And then you thought use your legs. And then you think you can use your seat, your bum. And then the great realization was that if I synchronized my breathing with the breathing of my horse, the horse immediately calmed down. And it was actually sensing my respiration. And that was amazing. And then the other part was, I did something called 3-day eventing, where you go over solid objects at a gallop on uneven ground, like stone walls and stuff like that. And we're not allowed to go cross country without our blood type strapped on our arms. And you get into these situations where you have to have complete mutual trust, or then I can do it because either one of you or both of you are going to get really seriously hurt. And when you understood that that was a partnership, and was when you start to be able to maybe consider yourself a horseman. But maybe this is the important part. A lot of people can take riding lessons. And I don't care if you can ride, even at an Olympic level. I care about horsemanship. And the person is a horseman, that's a sexist term, but horsepersonship, whatever. But the thing is that it's a very different thing than being able to ride. One's a technical thing that just basically, here's the horse, here's the animal, I'm just going to go try and win the Olympics. The other is a relationship. And that's, and you can
that's why you talk to them all the time.
Yeah, and they talk to you.
All of these things that you do extracurricular, although they're not really. They're central to the way you live, the ice climbing and riding, biking and all that. What do you take from those experiences that you incorporate into your work, and how do you do it? Or do you compartmentalize all the way down the line?
So I mentioned Melvin Kranzberg, so I'll mention this other great philosopher, Jimi Hendrix.
A giant of
Philosophy who
yes.
asked the most fundamental question. Because, right, we're all talking. I said it's all about experience design. So what's the fundamental question that he asked? Are you experienced? And I would ask, if you believe me that this is experience design, why would anybody believe that they're going to be successful at it if the people who bring about to make the decisions in the product is a homogeneous group of people with a very limited base of experience? What perspective are you going to bring to the problem? It's going to be a homogeneous, narrow thing. And if you're selling to that specific crowd and that's your entire market, that's fine. But my view is that the broader base of deep, visceral experience that's amongst the team, and it has to be a team. Like Renaissance man or woman is no longer possible. Renaissance team, absolutely, not only is it possible, it is essential. And the last person I would hire is me, because I already have the best one in the world. I have the best me, it's me. That means I'm the best person in the world, I'm just the best Bill Buxton in the world. And I know that the dirty little secret of highly accomplished people is that they dazzle so much with their brilliance and whatever they're good at, is that the people around them are risk at being like the deer in the proverbial headlight and not being able to see there's huge gaps and blank spots in the shadows that you just don't see because you're dazzled by the light. And you cannot be good at everything. And so I have this 360 rule. So on anything, you need to hire people who do what you're bad at. And if you don't know what you're bad at, you have no business being in a position of influence or power. Now, this comes down to this notion. I am a curator of my own life. I'm the designer of my own life. And part of my responsibility of that, if I want to be an effective experience designer, is to live, I don't mean read about, not on a computer screen, but go out there and live the richest set of experiences that I can, and we all have that power, that then I can bring and inform. Riding and rock climbing have had more to do to inform my design of digital technologies than any computer book I've ever read. And I still keep telling my boss that I should be able to deduct it all or have it expense claim it. I haven't won that one yet.
Absolutely. You wrote, I think in one of your columns, that the worst thing for an entrepreneur in this field is to stand pat, to not take chances. And I wonder if you could define for me the difference between danger and risk.
Yeah, so ask yourself, from the States, whatever country you're from, whatever culture you live in terms of subculture, what do you care about? What do you really value about the culture, society you're in? And then tell me one thing that of any of the keystones of respect in the world you live in and your value system that didn't come at great risk at somebody's expense. I mean, in Canada, if you think about it, think about Alexander Mackenzie. 12 years before Lewis and Clark went with 150 people to cross the continent, he went with 6 people in a birch bark canoe. And his first time he turned right at the Mackenzie River and goofed because he believed a map that Peter Pond gave him, and he ended up at the Arctic Ocean. Went back, paddled all the way back to Montreal, got in a boat, went to England, spent the winter learning how to do navigation, and then got back in a boat, went and then paddled all the way back, and this time he ended up at Bella Coola, just opposite the top end of Vancouver Island, in 1793. That's a kind of risky guy. 6 people, 1 canoe. And if you're a canoeist, you know that going in 1 canoe is dangerous because there's nobody to bail you out if you screw up. Anyhow, banks, anything, it's all but risk. And yet we live in the most risk-adverse society. We believe as good parents and teachers and schools that we got to protect everybody. And then when they grow up, we say, why aren't you an entrepreneur? Why aren't you taking risk? Well, how do you get good at music? Practice. How do you get good at at sports. Practice. How do you get good at math? Practice. How do you get good at risk? Practice. And yet, we tell our kids to practice their skills, but do we set up an environment, just like you bought a piano, so that gives you the opportunity to have an environment where they can practice their scales on the keyboard? What do you do in terms of bringing up our children in our schools that say, practice risk? Learn the consequences of what happens when you screw up. That's the first thing. So then we come back and sort of say, okay, we're Canadian, we're in Canada, we're in Victoria, so it doesn't count because there's no ice here. But in general, Canadians are used to walking on horizontal ice with normal shoes, and they can do so without falling down and cracking their heads open. Now, if you took somebody from Singapore, they would hurt themselves. That in itself is somewhat dangerous. They don't have the skill. So now let's put the ice vertical instead of horizontal and have the same exercise. Can you go up a vertical waterfall that's frozen? The answer is, if you haven't got the skill, if some people don't have the skill in horizontal ice, they're going to hurt themselves. You're really going to hurt yourself. That's dangerous, verging on suicidal. So there's 4 things that said that I or somebody more skilled than I could teach you in 3 days so you could safely do this. Safely to the extent that it's as safe as riding a bicycle in Toronto. That everything's relative, but you do that. But certainly more safe than riding your motorcycle in New England without a helmet, Michael. But
I apologize.
But the thing is that here's the 4 components that let you mitigate, turn danger into acceptable risk. 1, do you have the right training? 2, do you have the right tools? 3, do you have the right fitness? Even if you got the tools and the training, are you fit enough? If you're halfway up an ice climb and 3 pitches and you run out of steam, you're in deep trouble, not just for yourself, but for the people who are with you. And 4th, do you have the right partners? And I'd argue in any business venture, in any sports venture, in any political or social philanthropic venture, there are risks, and you are almost certainly, all the odds say you're going to fail. Every startup is going to fail. 98% of startups fail. And so if you don't want that to happen, you have to say, okay, what are the skills? And that's where creativity comes in. And that's a design question too, by the way. What are the skills? And the creativity you bring to enumerating the skills that are relevant to what you're trying to do, and the non-obvious ones, is one of the principal things about your success. What are the right tools? Again, the tools are non-obvious. Ice climbing is clear what the tools are. You're doing something new. What are the tools? And how do you even ask that question, much less answer it? And what's the training? If you're going to do a merger, and you've never done a merger before, don't start by buying Skype. Start with a little, how do you get people? And then finally, who are your partners? And even understanding that. And if you take those 4 things, that's what ice climbing taught me about business, is that how do I bring the appropriate team? And it's almost certain, if I'm going to acquire something, let's talk about a merger or something like that, or some new technology. If I'm going to do that, it's because I'm doing something new because I want to change what I'm doing. Well, I'm trying to change what I'm doing. Why would I do it with the people and the skill sets that got to me to where I am, as opposed to enumerating and figuring out the tools, partners, and that of where I'm going, and re-skill. Jean Piaget, the psychologist, he's sort of the god of education, has a really interesting definition of intelligence. And he defines intelligence as the ability of an organism to adapt to a changing environment. In fact, the dual process of accommodation and assimilation. Now, we start off saying it's not going really fast, but it is changing. Let's be clear, the world is changing. And the question is, how well are we adapting? And what is clear is, the most dangerous thing you can possibly do is maintain the status quo. You are guaranteed to atrophy and die a long, slow death. You will die. So, you got this new invention. I've been in 3 companies that didn't do this, and none of them are in business anymore. You've got this new idea. You can see your way through it. There's a whole new generation of stuff coming. But the executives will say, we're not going to do it because it'll kill our current revenue stream. And now here's my rule. If you can see a way to shoot yourself in the foot, you're delusional if you think your competitors can't as well. So the only choice is which toe can you live without and when can you live without it? Do it yourself. And whatever damage that does is nothing compared to what will happen If you don't do it yourself and you maintain a status quo, you atrophy and your competitors just eat your lunch. And you are guaranteed to be out of business. And it's just a question of time. And how do you shoot yourself in the foot if you've never experienced pain and you've never experienced the really failure, but also how you can pull yourself out of painful, difficult, dangerous situations and come back up on top?
On that note, thank you. Bill Buxton, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thanks.